Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's IEEE USA live stream webinar, Some Not So Common Questions to Ask If You're Thinking About Going Back to School. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. IEEE USA's goal is to create programming that is valuable, relevant, and of interest to you. As such, we will be sending a short survey to all registrants after this event and would love your feedback. We value your opinions and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes and share your thoughts. Our presenter for today's webinar is Dr. Robert Bob Danielle. Dr. Danielle currently serves as the Manager of Learning Solutions for Amazon Mechatronics and is certified as a performance and career coach with considerable expertise in the areas of career transitioning, leadership development, and change management. He's held strategic roles in the media, technology, government and military, higher education, and e-commerce sectors, and has also authored 2 ebooks, several articles, and also a number of other webinars for IEEE USA, the links to which we will share with you all in just a few moments. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome back, Bob. We're very excited for what you have in store for our audience today.
Thank you. And thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm going to go through a few things, and then we'll get right into the meat of the presentation. So just a few little things about me. I do live in the Pacific Northwest, and that picture reminds me that I'm not in it right now. So hopefully warmer days will be in my future coming up. But I'm happy right now to be sitting here and talking to you from my home. I'm an L&D and learning higher ed consultant. I've been in this space for quite some time, almost 2 decades. I've also, as Jonathan mentions, I've had multiple career transitions, which really connects to my one of my biggest areas that I'll talk about today is being a lifelong adult learner, which I think is applicable if you're on this presentation. And finally, I always take the approach that simpler is better. I'm not going to throw big words out here. I'm going to try to break it down so that it's easily digestible. And I'll just be clear by saying that there's going to be some portions inside this presentation that may require a little bit more discussion and a little more explanation. So please be interactive, use the chat, and Jonathan's going to monitor for me. And hopefully, if there's some questions that are bubbling up during our different segments, then he'll stop me and I'll be able to answer them. But we will have a Q&A at the end. That's my goal. And so we'll just go forward from there. So today's agenda, I'm not going to read it. And again, I apologize for all the words on the slide, not the 555 format that we usually look for, but I know that people will get my slides afterwards. So I'll just be brief about it. So we'll just go through all of that. So I'll start off with setting the table. I'll go through the not so common questions. I'll get to my final thoughts that I think will be pretty helpful for you, and maybe provoke some ideas and thoughts that you may have or feedback you're looking for. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So here we go. So I'm just going to set the table, and I like to do that. So just for clarity, when I use the word school, that's sort of like my Kleenex generic term. So school can apply to any educational or vocational provider. I want to be clear. I'm a big believer in both education and vocational training. So I don't want to distinguish. I don't want to pick one or the other. And this could apply to anything from a degree program to a certificate program to continuing educational credits. I know that some of you may be looking for opportunity to go back and get those types of things and work with a variety of providers. And so I'm trying to be, when I did this presentation, I was trying to be as neutral and vanilla as possible when I'm talking about, school. Also, my questions can also be topics or areas for inquiry. So I will try to give you questions, but sometimes I'll just give you some areas in which you may have your own questions for to point you to the right direction. I wanted to be clear that I have no agenda, so there's no axe to grind here. I've worked for nearly every Carnegie classification of educational providers. So that's public, private, for-profit, nonprofit. And so there's no agenda on my behalf. As I said before, I'm an advocate for lifelong learning. And so I will try to continue to talk from that lens. This presentation is really age neutral, and it's supposed to be cross-generational, meaning that whether you're you could literally be in high school or before that thinking about going back to school, or your parents could be on this call, or you can be someone that's gone back to school multiple times, or someone who's never been to school. So I've tried to keep that. I'm trying to keep that in mind when I've gone through this. And then I want to be really clear, in case you didn't know, there's a lot of information available right now to a lot of providers, especially on the educational side. There's been legislation that has come out probably in the last 10, 15 years, Gainful Employment and the College Transparency Act, which is really going to give you a lot of things that, quite frankly, weren't available like 15 years ago. So you're going to be able to go on their site. You're going to see things like net cost tuition. You're going to see about accreditation. You may even see some retention rates, some persistence data, some career information about what these particular programs might be able to deliver for you. It is there. Some of it's a little harder to track, and some of it is just like the way it was way back when you looked at electronics and you saw all the sine waves and all the all the ratios and everything else, and you didn't really understand it. But the bottom line is that there's information available. What I'm trying to do today is to try to give you kind of an insider's behind the scenes perspective. Think of this as the Carfax, except for the fact when they say that the car has been worked on or the boat or whatever has been worked out at the shop. Instead of just seeing what was done, now you're going to talk to the person that actually worked on it. And that's really kind of be my goal. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to share these slides. So there'll be a deck that'll go out. It'll most likely be a PDF. But I really encourage you to, I'm seeing that the audio levels are hot, so maybe we can tone that down a little bit, or I'll talk a little lower. But please be interactive. Please put in this. Please put your information in the chat. I can see up, so I have to look up to see that. And I'll pause. Okay, so question number one, and I will read the question, okay? Number one is, inquire about the capstone or senior project courses for your program. And that means for whatever you are, if you're in engineering, if you're in IT, if you're in business, finance. And so capstones, if you're not familiar with capstone is, a capstone is ultimately, it should encapsulate everything that you should have learned in that program, okay? So when you're talking to someone who's trying to enroll you into that school, whether it be an advisor or an enrollment representative, you should have that. You should ask about that, inquire about that. Now you may get some funny looks, or maybe get some pauses in that. But what this really is, again, is it should really clearly define about what you should have learned in the program. And capstone and senior projects are actually classes, okay? So it's not, they're courses, I should say. So this is something that generally you'll see these if you're taking a degree program, but even if you're taking a certificate or even taking like a boot camp class, there should be something that at the end should demonstrate what you have learned and what that might look like. Now, the one thing that you want to ask for, if you can, is to see a completed project. And that could be whether it's a documentation, it could be a model, it could be a portfolio. I've even seen in engineering programs where they actually have built things that you could see, feel, and touch. There may be some pushback to see documentation because of it may contain student information because of FERPA, which is like the HIPAA version in academics. But what you really want is just to ask that question. They could scrub that out if that becomes an issue. But at the very minimum, try to see if you can see a course rubric that really kind of lays out everything that's in that class, the outcomes, the grading, and I think I mentioned in the deck, a syllabus is okay, course outlines are okay, but what we really want to see is like the meat. It's great to be able to see that what the finished product will look like, because as somebody that used to be an academic administrator, and also somebody who's run campuses and branch campuses of universities, what I would look for when I would attend these things is to see whether or not there was any deficits in the student learning along the way. Because you have to remember, programs are a collection. A program is a collection of courses, and what you end up want to see is, are you getting enough in your marketing, your finance, your cores, and that's what a capstone will deliver. So that's a question that you might, or an area that you might want to consider talking about. Second non-common question is to ask to talk to a dean or faculty chair for your program or your field of study. Now, you can talk to a faculty member if they allow that, or if they grant you permission for that, or present someone to talk to you. That the reason why I'm asking for a dean or a faculty chair is generally they'll have a more broader knowledge about that program or field of study. I was a faculty member, and I will tell you that I was pretty good about knowing the courses that I taught and a little bit about the program. But a faculty chair or a dean would have a little more broadening of that, and they may be able to answer some of these questions, which I'm going to go through. You want to find out or ask what the expectations are for the students and the program itself. Now, you may say, why would I want to do that? I mean, isn't the program, if it's a finance program, wouldn't that be implied that it's about finance? And I would say that's not necessarily always the case. What I like to find out is, what do they think that this program is designed for? So what you want to hear, or what you're looking for, is things like, hey, we would expect a student that would finish this program or take these courses, it would prepare them to have a career in finance, or have a career in electrical engineering, because these are the things that we have learned along the way that we're using inside this program. And if you were to graduate from this, it would put you in a better position to go out and get a career in this field of study. That's what you're kind of getting at when you ask for those types of things. Second piece of this is, you want to know if faculty have industry-related connections in your area or region. I mean, it couldn't be nationally. I will say this: you really want them to be locally aligned with somebody, because there's opportunities for internships. There's opportunities for co-op, which are like internships if you use that kind of terminology. Also, a lot of times universities will have advisory boards, which is really good for a university to have, because then that program could be reviewed from professionals inside of that industry, and they can look at it and they could say, hey, maybe you should be looking at teaching your students C#, or looking at these types of electronic components. And so it's it's actually a pretty good indicator whether or not this is a program or a course of study that's a little bit fresher, and it's going to be something that's going to be more relevant, because the end goal is to get a career. So you want to make sure that it's aligned in that some way or fashion. Talk about them, or ask them about faculty development initiatives. And what you want to really get to is that, are they staying current in the field? Some universities are very, very good at it. Some vocational providers are good at it. Some of us are not. If anybody's ever been to has taken classes, and it seems like that instructor, professor, or trainer are really kind of going through some yellow dog-eared notes, and it doesn't really seem like it's in this century or even in this decade, that may be something that you might want to ask about. Like, what are they doing to keep their faculty current? What are faculty doing? And again, you may not get any answers, and I want to be absolutely clear if you've gotten this far, but these are the things you might want to ask for. You also want to know how faculty are assessed, and that could be faculty, instructors. The terminology could be interchangeable, but how are they evaluated? How are they assessed? Some of you might have seen Rate My Professor online, where you can go in, you can check how a professor is rated and assessed. I think that's okay. A lot of institutions do have like evaluation or survey forms that they give to their students after the courses. But more importantly, what you want to try to figure out is, what's the process, if there is a process. What are they looking for? And again, you're not looking for individual faculty faculty evaluations. What you're looking at is that, is there something in place for that to happen? Again, we all want to learn from the best, but we also want to know how they're being held accountable and rated, and not just from students, but also from peers as well. And then the other piece of this is, and it's a question that you may get some vague answers on, but faculty-student issues do arise, and I'm really more on the academic side is what I'm getting at here. And you probably want to talk about how those are handled and resolved. Some of this information might be available on the website. I'm not sure if everybody does that. And the reason why that's important, because inevitably, and again, as an academic administrator for some time now, there's going to be those issues. And it would be really important to know on the front end how they're going to be taken care of. Is there a board that you go to? Is it an email? Is it a special group? Are they handled but with the faculty and the student alone? Does the dean get involved? Does the faculty chair get involved? And then ultimately, what I like to know is, what are the faculty hours or instructional hours, if they have any, and how are they used? Sometimes, especially if you're working with was adjunct or visiting professors, they don't have that opportunity to have faculty. They don't have office hours, or they're not part of their contract. And so, as a student, you're probably going to want to know what happens when I need to get a hold of you, and what does that look like, and when am I able to get a hold of you? A lot of that is laid out in a syllabus, but it's nice to ask that question up front, because if a lot of times, if you're just going back to school, you're going to require a little bit more attention and a little more care, and it's nice to know whether or not that's already built in. I'm going to pause. Jonathan, do you see anything that I might want to answer right now, or do I go on?
Hi, Bob. So actually, we do have quite a few questions. So, folks, before we get to them, just to note, we will be answering a couple questions currently, but then we'll be saving the rest for the end of the presentation. So, if we don't get to your questions right now, stay tuned.
Okay.
So, Bob, first question. Um, One of our audience members says, uh, our audience member says, I'm a PhD dropout. I'm restricted by visa to move from work visa and emotionally by all salary dollars compared to being poor in student visa. How do I break into research jobs? I have an Master's of Science and Master's of Business Administration degree. Any tips or thoughts?
I would break into research jobs. So are they AB? I guess I would have to know if they're ABD, if they've completed the coursework. I'll tell you what, this is a bigger question, and I'm happy to talk offline with that. So my information would be available at the end of the presentation, and they can reach out to me directly, because this is a bigger question. It aligns with what I've done before, so I have some tips on that one. So if we could put that in the parking lot, that would be great.
Sure thing. And folks, we will provide Dr. Danielle's contact information shortly. So, Bob, this next question, any advice for a senior engineer thinking of going back for a PhD program?
I think that the first thing you have to ask yourself, and there's two questions that align at the same time. The first question is that, what's your end goal? I mean, if your end goal is to get into a higher level position, or you're looking for advancement in a different organization or a current organization, that would be my first question. And the second question would be, and they would be like aligned, is got to think about the time that you're going to have to put aside to accomplish that. I know that for me personally, I know that I had to be, I knew I had to be at the right spot in my life, because getting into a doctoral program is going to require a little bit of time. I think the average that you have to set aside in your mind is like, can you spare like 30 extra hours a week? I know that sounds absolutely crazy. And when I first decided to do that, and I was in my 50s, I was like, how the heck am I going to get 30 hours? But then when I sat down and thought about all the ESPN I watched and all the sports and everything I do, I was able to kind of trim out and figure out how I was going to get the 30 hours in there. So aligning those two together will give you kind of a good kickoff point on whether or not for lack of a better word, the juice is worth the squeeze. So that would be my thoughts. And again, talk to me offline about that. I have a lot of other questions I would ask, but that would be how I would leave it right now.
Great, thank you, Bob. And Neil, thanks for the question. Bob, we'll answer. We'll get to one more question.
Okay.
Our audience member asks, is a dissertation a capstone class, or would it be
No,
considered the same thing?
no, they're not. A dissertation is really a dissertation involves either a research project that it's really it's a higher level capstone program. I mean, there's a lot more involved. You have coursework, you have some research that you have to go through. You're presenting and defending a position that you've taken. It's more research focused than I think a capstone would be, because a capstone and a senior project would be a collection of everything you've learned up to that point. A dissertation would be more of a singular topic that you have decided to explore at a different level. I'm giving a very granular answer, but I would say it would be like a capstone program on steroids, if I had to say that, like a lot of steroids. So, okay.
Gotcha. Thanks, Bob. And
Okay.
thank you for your great questions, everyone. We'll get to the rest of them at the end of the presentation, so stay tuned.
Okay.
Bob, back to you.
Thank you. So let's go. So the other thing I want you to find out about is about student services and support. Big issue. A lot of universities, and this may be available on their website due to the College Transparency Act. Again, this would be for educational providers. But what is not often shared is that a lot of students don't make it really even to the first year. Some don't even make it through the first semester, or let alone quarter. And a lot of times it is because of the lack of, or they're not aware of the student support and services that are available to them. So I've listed a bunch of different support services that are out there. If you hadn't taken the time to look at them, there are so many more. But I would say ask about the more the merrier, okay? Because this is really sometimes, especially if you're going back to school for the first time in a long time, or the first time, right? You're going to want to know where all these pieces are. And I like to know what's available in advance. And I think that's I think it really helps you build a strong foundation for success. The hours availability and what I call SLAs. So when I talk about service level agreements, I mean, so what is the turnaround time? So for example, a lot of universities now have actually gone to career centers or career services, and they set up, you could set up appointments, you can meet, you can talk to folks. And what you might want to figure out is like, what is like the wait time? And I'll get into the reason why, because when you look at what you want to find out is what is the student to advisor ratio? Because if you're at a university that has, I don't know, 30,000 students or 5,000 students, and the ratio from advisor to student is 1 to 1,000, 1 to 750, 1 to 10,000, you may have to wait quite a while before you get some of these services. Not all of them, because they will ramp up on more services than other services. But you might want to check into that to see if you're somebody that's really going to take advantage of everything that's available to you. You might want to know what your expectations are before you're going in. And it's not necessarily a make or break deal for everyone, but it's nice to know that going in. And it's not really a question that a lot of times will come up. And then tutoring, I mentioned that because this is the one that usually breaks my heart, because we find that most folks won't ask for tutoring. They'll kind of suffer in silence. But most vocational or educational providers do provide some type of tutoring or extra support and services. But you need to find out whether it's free and how is it delivered? How is it provided? Is it a group setting? Is it online? Is it 24/7? Is there certain hours? Is there certain, however there is delivered, or where it is, or what it is? It's an important question to ask, especially if you're not extremely comfortable going in and you're going to be okay with trying to find out and get help and support. And this really ties back to that office question. The faculty office question is, there's going to be times for most students that they're going to need some type of additional assistance. Whether they can get that at home or not is another question, but you're probably going to want to know. And it's good to know going in what you can expect. The last thing you want to do is, jump into something and find out that you're pretty much an island and you're going to have to really wait it out to see and when you may need help. So that's something to consider moving forward. This particular section, I'm going to be quite honest with you. We're going to get a lot of questions on this one, so I'm going to try to break this down. So this is student and individual course success rates early on in a program. Okay. And I'm going to be clear about this, because this is not about graduation. This is not about graduation rates from programs. And we know that, I think on average, graduation rates ranges from the low single digits to like maybe 50, 60%, depending on the university on average, right? These are these are individual course success rates, and what they can be viewed as, or at least from an academic administration perspective, they can be indicators of long-term success. So let me explain what that means. Okay, if there's a high percentage of students that are dropping out earlier in their programs or failing classes, let's just say in their first 3 or 4 classes or their first quarter or sessions or semester, whatever it may look like, if they share that with you, or if that's provided for you, you might want to ask them why, what that might look like, and if there's any initiatives that might be in place to prevent that or mitigate that. One of the things I found in one of the universities I worked at was that we looked at what students were doing in their first couple of classes, their first sessions or quarters. And what we found out that when we did a deeper dive, and one thing you'll find out if you're ever in academia is that there is a lot of student data out there, and accessing it sometimes for the university just takes them to kind of break it out. But what we found is when we looked closely at why students were dropping out, in addition to other things, we identified like 6 or 7 what I would call tent pole classes that we saw that either when a student took them or there was an issue with when students took them in their program in their first like year or less. And then we started to look into like the why of that. Okay. And a lot of that, again, too, like we talked to students that weren't successful in that. We looked at faculty. We looked at a lot of different things. And what we determined was that, maybe we didn't have our strongest faculty members in those earlier classes. Maybe they were just too hard, or maybe, too hard is a kind of a sticky wicket. I won't get there. So what we determined was that we needed to take a deeper dive at that and hopefully work through some of those issues and try to figure out how we can better prepare students for long-term success by taking a closer look at them. I'm going to pause because there's probably a question or two in there.
Hi, Bob. Sure. So, folks, we will get to a couple more questions. Bob, also real quick, noticing there are a bit of connectivity issues, but I'll let you know if it gets too severe.
Okay.
But as for the questions, folks, so I do see that a lot of them are situational. As I mentioned before, you might need a more in-depth analysis. So we do recommend reaching out to Bob personally for a more in-depth consultation. But here is our first question, Bob. So our audience member asks, sorry, one second. Here we go. Any advice on how to be a full-time worker and simultaneously be enrolled in a PhD program, for instance, in electrical engineering, I think? I have 5 years US work experience and I have a master's in electrical engineering from Texas. So, any advice on how to be able to balance both?
Oh, that's tough. I had a really demanding full-time job, and I went to, also I was going through my doctoral program. And I think one, you just have to manage your time. You're going to, I mean, I sat down with my family, I sat down with my friends, I play a lot of sports, and I sat down with everybody, and I just basically, made it very clear that I had to give up some things in order to, to do, to be successful in my program. I mean, it was a very, candid conversation that I had with them. I managed my time, I thought pretty well. I mean, I was very regimented, and I gave myself some breaks too. That's the other piece of it. It is tough trying to juggle both of them. I applaud anybody trying to do that. I just think you need to just be upfront with all the things that you're dealing with. So if you're at work and you're going to have to talk to them, that there may be some times that you might have to give up something, and in your program, just be upfront with your professors and that chair of that program to see if there's any opportunity to find some breaks. For me, it was just a matter of just sticking to my regiment and just staying to it. I mean, I worked at least 10 to 12 hours a day, and then I would take a break, come home, and then I would do all my coursework starting in the evening, and then I would try to get done, and then I wouldn't work on like Friday nights, and I'd work a little Saturday, and I would work most of Sundays. So yeah, it's just finding that balance, and everybody's going to be different. So
Great. Thanks for the insight, Bob. Uh, this next question, sorry, is another situational one. Our audience member Priya says many opportunities in schools are exclusively for full-time students. As a part-time student, how do I familiarize myself with opportunities for part-time students like me?
I'm looking at, and so by the way, when I look up, it's because I have another monitor above me. So I'm just reading the question. I apologize if my eyes are darting away. So for those part-time student, how familiar opportunities for students like me? You know, that's again, I'll take that question offline. And the only reason why I'm asking is that I know that the universities I worked is that we afforded the same, programs and opportunities for our part-time students that we did our full-time students. So if we had career fairs and other things, we didn't delineate between the two. So I'd like to know more about that and what that, what's really going on there, because I don't want to answer that question based on my perspective. I'd like to know what's going on from there. So if they're okay with reaching out to me, I would be happy to have that dialogue with them.
So Priya, we do recommend reaching out to Dr. Danielle, and we'll provide you with the contact information shortly. Bob, we'll get to one more question then.
Okay.
Um, our audience member, Miguel, excuse me, asks, should you have a clear research topic before applying to a doctoral program?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm going to say yes, but I'll also say that I did when I started my doctoral program. I did, and then it completely changed when I was in my program, when I went through my coursework. And so there's nothing wrong with it. I would say the sooner you can have an idea of what you want to do, the better. I would just say keep an open mind, that when you get into your program, that there might be something that you want to do that you may not have thought of before. But anything you could bring in from the get-go, um, it's an added plus. And I would say that if you're thinking about a doctoral program, there's a great little book that you should try to read. And again, I don't push books, but I will just say that it's called Dissertation Journey. It's actually it provides pretty good insight. It's a quick read. But yeah, I don't think it would hurt you, but I would say that be open-minded that it could change. So hopefully sooner than later. Nothing's worse than starting your dissertation and finding out that you don't like it and then restarting it, because that's not good either. So yeah, so I would say yes.
Definitely. Thanks, Bob. And so we did have a little bit of insight from one of our audience members. Our audience member says, I have two bachelor's, three master's, and a PhD, and I never had a clear idea when I started my PhD programs. I learned after I got there. I knew the general area, but the topic became more focused once I learned more. So really appreciate that insight. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, back to you.
Okay. All right. Well, here's another thing too. Again, and has to be revealed to you. So I don't know how you'll dig into it. Sometimes you may be able to find this on the site. So a high percentage of middling grades, like C's and D's, which is still passing, could be, it could be viewed as indicators of potential academic issues in the class, because you have to in the future, because you have to realize that early coursework, especially in the cores, your cores are about, there's general studies, things about writing and communication, and I'm not going to glass over those, but your core work, those are building blocks. So a lot of courses are sequential. So if you're taking like a networking, or you're taking IT or anything, or engineering, each class builds on the next class. And what you don't want to have happen is that first block, that first thing you get, that should be your foundation. And you want that foundation to be as strong as possible, as deep as possible. And if you see that in their programs that students are not really doing well in the early fundamentals, building on that weaker foundation could cause you issues downstream, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Again, you're trying to ascertain, what is this university thinking about these things, or are they just trying to get you through the program? Okay, and then I just mentioned this, and I won't read it, but honestly, if you're not achieving academic success in the very earliest stages, one of the things that could happen, let's just say you do have a mishap and you have got to take a course, got to take another course over in order to continue with that program. It's additional costs. So that's the other thing that's why this is really important, right? I'm a measure twice, cut once person. So I really want to know from the very get-go what I'm going to be up against. And is the university looking at that? I will tell you that it doesn't matter the university. For some reason, statistics can be really challenging for students, even myself. And so you want to know if they've already factored that in. Like, are they providing additional resources and support for folks that are taking that classes? Is there going to be study groups or something involved? So that's really where you're trying to get with this particular this particular question or topic that I've addressed. Okay. Some of you I saw in the chat, and I'm sorry when I look up, my eyes go that way, but some of you talked about in tuition assistance from your employer. And it's a question that you can ask someone who's trying to get you to go into their program, which is, what do they have any alliances or agreements that could provide you with, tuition relief or fees reductions, internship or recruitment opportunities, career fairs? Is the university and that employer, are they collaborating on curriculum? Those are things that a lot of folks don't ask. And the benefits to that are, that educational or vocational providers offerings may be of value, may be viewed as value by those employers. So if you're thinking about getting into a career or in one, and you see that this university has a really good relationship with this particular employer, it's almost, one could assume that they see value in that school or that provider, right? So again, it's another deeper dive into why you may pick one or not pick one, provider over the other. And then really this can help you better plan if that's, your education, because what you want to do for most folks that go back to school, especially lately, we understand that the ROI is now, the educational ROI becomes the bigger factor other than just convenience and choice. This may help you look at your opportunities or your options a little bit differently and help you plan accordingly to put you in the best possible position for success. So I'll take like one question if there is on this, and if not, we can get through the deck.
Sure, Bob. 1 second. Let me sorry, folks. Give me just a second to find the proper question. So, Bob, this question from one of our audience member. I'm thinking about going back to school for a master's in electrical engineering. I was thinking of working for a year in the industry. Is that the right amount of time, or is it better to work for 3 years? Or do you think there's a recommended amount of time for that?
No, but I think you're onto a right. I think you're on the right path here, because a lot of times they'll go from their bachelor degree right into a master's program. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I think that what I think is sometimes a little more beneficial, and again, depends on the individual, depends on the organization or the course of study that they want to take, or the field of study the field they want to be in. Having that experience, working inside the industry and then getting that master's degree is a great combination, because each company, each organization is going to, grow you, groom you, whatever the terminology you like better, into the ways that they do things. And so getting that educational background, a different perspective, combined with that hands-on experience in working in that field, it could be a dynamite 1-2 punch. I was in higher ed, and it was pretty high up there, and I did not have a doctorate in higher ed. So even though I was working in the field, I still, thought I was successful, and I was. But going to school for a doctorate in higher education, I found that I got a well-rounded background that I wouldn't have gotten from my employer. So I thought that was an added bonus. And how long or how little that you are in, the experience level is, I think it really depends on you. Again, I don't think there's any rule of thumb, but I would say more than 6 weeks, and I would say less than 5 years. So that would be my answer.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next section. All right. So this one's going to take a little work, and I've kind of teased this one a little bit with the question of, do they have an educational alliance? And this is something that you might want to consider. And this is where you go out on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn has a search feature. So if you go to LinkedIn and you put a search in there for like a university, sometimes it'll come up with the university, and sometimes I think you can drop down and ask like people who have attended it, and you could see all like the alumni who have listed that particular school or provide. And I said, remember, school is my generic term, or provider. And what you can do is you can reach out to those folks, okay? And if you so there's a couple of things. One, just ask about their educational experiences. How you want to word that is really your own comfort level. I can tell you I have done this both ways. I've done this when I was thinking about going back to school, and I've done this when as part of a university reaching out to alumni to ask them about their experiences. um, I would say if it's possible, try to connect with people in your field of study, because sometimes the university or the school or the provider, the vocational provider, they have different, areas of specialty. So if you're in engineering, you probably try to want to find somebody who's had an engineering degree. If you can see that on LinkedIn, but it's okay if you don't. What you're really trying to get them is try to get them to give you any type of feedback from their own experiences. I will tell you that don't be surprised, you know, if you don't get any responses. Um, but I'll be candid. I have a tendency to view those as a little bit as more negative than positive, and I'll tell you why. If someone reached out to me to ask me about my experiences, where I went to, excuse me, where I got my master's degree, I would reach back out to them. I would just say, "Hey, I had a great time. I really enjoyed it. This is why I liked it," and I would really answer their questions. Um, if I didn't like it or I didn't want to talk about it, I probably wouldn't respond. And I know people don't always respond to requests from LinkedIn. We all get those messages. But this is just my personal perspective, and it doesn't necessarily have to be yours. But again, I've actually reached out to folks, and they've pretty much blatantly have told me that they wouldn't recommend the university. So yeah, we'll take that with a grain of salt. And another really cool benefit to doing this, and again, this is part of, if you've listened to any of my other webinars or read any of my other books, this is really about building your connections or building your strategic connections. And if that person had a good to great experience, and they see you as somebody that's taking an initiative to find out about that, that place that they got their education, this could become a really key and strategic connection for you going down the line. I know that when I was making the transition from the media to technology, I reached out. I did informational interviews to folks, and when it came to me actually trying to make that jump, those folks were there. They really gave me a lot of guidance, and some of them even gave me some, tips on how to get inside their field and also inside their organization. So there's a benefit in doing this. I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of folks, but you're not asking them to, donate blood or anything like that. You're asking them how, what were their experiences, and you could take that from there. All right, we're getting to the end here. So this is whether or not they hold virtual or live commencement, which are graduation ceremonies. And I want to be candid. This may not be a deal breaker for a lot of folks. A lot of folks, about the research says about 50% of folks are interested in going to a commencement ceremony, and or graduation ceremony, and the other half obviously aren't. So, but if you're interested, is this something you're thinking about? You want to know how often they are held. When I worked at one of my universities, we did them 3 times a year, which was really nice, because the big one is usually in the the end toward the year, like June or late May, and then we had some in the wintertime, and we had one like late fall or something like that. So you want to ask those questions. Again, is this something you're interested in? You want to know if they're local or regional or virtual, right? Sometimes, especially if you work for a larger university and they have a lot of branch campuses, they may not be local. So you may be going to school in one place, but yet they may be held regional. And so you might want to ask that question. And the last thing I'll point out, and again, this is just, take this with a grain of salt. Ultimately, whether or not you attend maybe less about you and more about the people that have supported you. I had attended both of my graduation ceremonies for my bachelor's and my master's. I was older. I didn't get my bachelor's degree until I was 35, and I really wanted my family to be there, and it was a big deal to me. I did not go to my doctoral commencement ceremony. It was, it was in a different state. I regret it to this day. I'll be candid with you. I just didn't go. I don't know what it was. It was a lot of things going on in my life, and I thought, well, and I watched it virtually. They called my name, but I think back, and it's been 7 years now, and I wish I would have went. So, I say that I don't want to live in a world of regret, but if I had one regret, that's something that I would just share with you. But it's really up to you. Okay. All right. So here are some final thoughts before we wrap this up. One, you really need to research your educational vocational options better than your next major purchase, right? If you're spending a lot of time looking at when you're for your next car or your next house and you're digging into everything, you got to do this for making this type of choice. And to be honest with you, I just gave some uncommon questions. There are many questions to ask, many questions out there. Things like, whether how do they handle transfer credits? What other electives can you? I mean, there's so many other questions you can ask, but I would say this: really research, really dig deep into this. Even more than sometimes you're even going to a restaurant or picking a provider, right? I mean, we all read reviews. This is something you got to go in depth on. And really, the goal here is to gain as much relevant information as possible, right? Because you want to make the best possible informed decision. And there's a reason why I bolded and feel good about it, because nothing's worse than making a decision that could change your life and not feel good about it, right? So you want to put yourself in a position to feel really good about it. I view any incomplete information or vague responses as cautionary signs. It's not because anybody's trying to be deceptive. It could be they just don't know, which again is a sign, because I think that if you are trying to recruit people inside your organization, you should be prepared for some of those off book questions. And somebody could always say, hey, look, I don't have the information now that I can come back to you, but this is just my personal opinion. Again, not casting any disparaging, comments on anyone or anything, but I just say that's just the way I would view it. And I will point this out, that making the right choice can really change the trajectory of your life and your family's life. I know that it did mine. Education is one of those things that's a life changer for some folks, right? It puts you in a position to have the success and the opportunities that may not have been presented to you before. And then finally, and this is the question that I haven't really talked about, but this is something that this is the one that this is not a webinar for this particular question, but I would just ask you, because some of you have referenced this, is that you got to ask yourself whether or not you want or need to go back to school or even begin school. And that's a tough question to ask. And there's a lot of variables that go into that, but you really need to feel like you're ready to make that step. And someone talked about that for their doctorate program. And that's true whether you're going for your doctorate, your master's, your bachelor's, a certificate program, a boot camp. Just ask yourself, like, whether or not this is what I need or want to do. And I think that's going to help you align. And, I've said this before and I'll say it again, always surround yourself with people that are vested in your success. Ask them what they think. Ask somebody who works with you. Ask somebody, you want to make the best possible decision and choice, but it always begins with you. That's what ownership is all about. So with that being said, we'll open it up for Q&A. That's actually a picture of me. I don't know how old I was, but I was thinking back then, and I'm certainly thinking back. I'm thinking right now. So I will open the floor for
Fantastic.
questions.
Thanks, Bob. So, folks, we are at the official Q&A segment of the webinar. Please post your questions in the live chat and comment section. We'll get to as many as we can. So, Bob, this question is from our audience member, Priya,
Okay.
from earlier. It's her question. The question is, it is much easier to understand the timeline of a full-time student in a PhD program from start of the program to graduation. This information is much tougher to comprehend for a part-time student. For a part-time student, in your opinion, how do you know if they're on the right track while balancing work? Do you think there's like a benchmark that they might have to meet to evaluate that, or any advice?
I, okay.
And maybe this is something that our audience member needs to reach out to get a more in-depth analysis.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
if that is the case,
yeah, it's. I mean, it's just what ends up happening when you're part-time and you're going through the process is that it elongates it. And so that the challenge is always going to be if you do it in a part-time, if you do it on a part-time basis, is that do you still feel connected to what you originally set the goal out to be, right? Are you still marching towards your North Star? And I think that's probably a big question, because if if you're keeping track of the balance between working on your doctorate, or your PhD, whatever that may be, and doing the other parts of the things in your life, and they're staying in balance, then I think that's how you know whether or not you're on track. If you find yourself drifting, if something is taking a bigger priority than the other, then it may be time to kind of reassess whether or not you need to either stop one or realign some time to take care of the other. The one benefit about trying to get your doctorate as a full-time student, going through that process, is that um, some universities really set some timelines in there. So you go through your coursework. Like the program I was in, we went through a coursework that was about 28 months. I'm guessing here, don't quote me on this. And then we put together our proposal, we presented it, and then we had, I think, like 18 months to complete our dissertation. So there was a very stringent approach, because there's a lot of ABDs out there, which is all but dissertation, and universities want to make sure that if you go into these programs that you actually graduate from them with a doctorate. And so it's really kind of aligning what you set out from the very beginning, and taking those milestones, those check-in points, to see whether or not you're staying true to where you are. I mean, you could deviate a little bit, like let's just say things have come up in your life and you got to spend a little more time. But if it's the scales are tipping to one side, and I'm talking about being away from working on what you should be working on, it can cause you to get out of balance, and you just start to lose that kind of that edge which you really need in these types of things that you take on. So, but again, I'm happy to talk to somebody about that.
This next question from Bruce. Bruce asks, are there any common places to search for graduate level funding, scholarships, etc.?
Some universities have that information on their sites, so I would start there. A Google search you'll be shocked where there may be funding. I mean, there's so many. There's a lot of sponsorship opportunities. There's a lot of this is not really my area of expertise, but there's a lot of scholarship opportunities, grant opportunities that are out there. A lot of associations will list that. So if you're looking for something in a particular field of study, they may talk about that. They may direct you to that. Even if you're applying to a school or thinking about going to a school, that enrollment advisor or enrollment representative may be able to tell you what might be available or out there and point you to the right direction. I will tell you this: employers now have become a little the number of employers and the amount of dollars that they're allotting to, especially for the undergraduate degrees, is gone up over years. So checking with employers, see if your employer is actually going to provide you some benefits, is another option as well. So I hope that answered the question.
Definitely. And I can imagine there are plenty of sources and resources that students don't even know about. I know when I was in undergrad, I know we had a lot of scholarship and grant opportunities that weren't
Publish.
disclosed
Yeah.
very, as much as they should have been. So I know some of our audience members have mentioned tuition reimbursement from
Yeah.
employers. So definitely something to look into. Thanks, Bob. This next question. Doing masters in electrical engineering is no joke. I took 2 signal processing grad classes as undergrad and got toasted in the math. How to deal how can you deal with the math level, or any insight on that? How uh, anyone in this situation can improve on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's the one thing that no one ever talks about. So there's, and again, I'm just going to spout some numbers. They may not be applicable to the universities or the schools out there, but uh, anywhere between 50 and 65% of students going into a college level course or college level program are not going to be at college level math. Um, it just is. There's AccuPlace. There's different types of tests. Sometimes that's bypassed, because if you're going from high school or community college to to a 4-year degree, there sometimes stuff is just articulated in, so there's not necessarily a placement that takes place. And I won't get into that. That's a different path. We recognized that at universities that I worked in, and so we made sure that we had a good amount of math tutors. We made sure that we built in tutoring and group studies and all types of things into our programs and courses so that students could have that opportunity. So, because we recognize that, remember I talked a little bit about where, those 10 pole classes where these were the classes that people were stumbling at and they would eventually leave or have to take over and over again, which is not good. We would look at those and we would start to set up resources in those areas to help students get through that. It takes a conscious effort from the administrative staff to kind of look at that. And that may be a question to ask because that is a challenge. I mean, math doesn't come easy for a lot of folks, especially higher level math. So that would be my answer to that. So
Great, thank you. And Bob, I do see that we're reaching the end of the hour. We do still have several more questions. Do you
I could
mind?
stay.
Okay, great. So, folks, we'll go on for about 5 more minutes and get to as many questions as we can.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. So this next question, Carrie asks, in addition to what you've outlined here, any thoughts on what to say first when someone shares that they're thinking about pursuing higher degrees?
So I assume that they're talking to you. Some advice I would ask them, why? I mean, I think that, okay, I'm just reading it right there. I'm sorry, I'm looking up. If you're like, nah, I need to say what's professor shares. I think you'd want to ask them why. They may give you a funny look at that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for why people want to do that. Again, I'm never going to stop somebody from going back to school, but I can only share a personal experience. I had a very good friend, no longer with us, who just went after degree after degree after degree. And I loved her for it because she was diligent. She wanted to learn. But, at the end of the day, they weren't getting into it wasn't helping them get into where they wanted to be. And they couldn't really figure that out. And so, once we really started to dig in and they, came to me and talked to me about that, we figured out that maybe it was best to get the experience first, as somebody alluded to, and then go out and get the degree. Now, if you're already in that field of study and you feel like you want to get an advanced degree because you feel that's going to help you do some things, not just in the organization you're in or the field you're in, but maybe another one, then those are really good reasons to do that. And I'm not against, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against going out and getting, a vocational skill or another skill that may not apply to anything that you are doing right now, or you just want to do that. But if you're going to devote that time and effort away from the things that may be of value to you, whether that's family, friends, work, you might want to think about the reasons behind that. And so that would be my advice. And I could extend another 15 minutes if that's fine too. So I didn't want to just cut anybody off who wanted a question. So I offer that. So
Sure thing. Thanks, Bob. And this next question, Andrew asks, so echoing Priya from the part-time student from our earlier question, a lot of the topics so far seem to be geared towards new undergrad slash full-time programs. Is there anything in this presentation specifically that you think could be very vital for returning part-time students?
yeah, honestly, I did this really for more, it was kind of a mix between new and people actually returning back to school, because usually you don't think about that, especially if you've been in school before. There's like the frame of references, you remember the way it was. And so it's good to have that perspective, I think this applies whether you're going back or have never been to school. And I think the keys I think the support services are B. And I think also asking about the expectations inside the program, especially from a dean or a faculty chair. You don't want to go into something and find out, and I don't want to mention the program because I'll give away the school, but I remember that there was a program in one of the organizations I was affiliated with, that the way that the wording of the program might indicate that it was going to get somebody in a field of study, or excuse me, in a field of study or program career path, that it didn't. So you don't be, you got to determine whether or not the title is really what at the end of the day, and that's why the capstone classes and the senior project classes will kind of help you a little bit with that. You want to make sure that it's pushing you in the right direction.
Mm,
Again, it's not that anybody's being disingenuous. It's not that way. Sometimes we just, sometimes we when we look for schools or we look for programs, we look at it like we're reading a menu, and it's designed that way because that's how our education is broken out. It's broken out by segments and credits and courses and even vocational. It's by stages and phases, right? And you want to look past that. You want to look at, like, how are they defining success, right? You want to look at their why. Like, what does this program at the end of the day, what is it supposed to do for somebody that takes it, right? um, and that's good to ask, whether you're going back to school or you've never been to school. You want to know the why. And and then you want to ask, if they do go down that path, you want to ask them how they know that. So,
mm.
and by looking at LinkedIn, you could see, like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at this Fortune 100 company, and they have a ton of folks that have gone, that they hire in their engineering program, and they all have degrees from this university. What's going on over here? So you start to connect value with it. And again, it's all perception and it's all interpreted the way you want. But you're looking for some data points that make sense to you, and the only way to figure them out is to ask the question and to do your own research. So
For sure. I mean, everyone's situation is different, but I'm sure there are some correlating themes for anyone,
yeah,
regardless of the
yeah.
situation. So yeah, thank you for that. And so this is our last question. Before we get to this question, really like to thank our audience for all their input in the chat function as well. See that a lot of our audience members are in similar situations or industries, so your input is also incredibly helpful. So Bob, this last question, could you share how you convinced the committee, I'm guessing your employer, that you managed the full-time PhD and full-time job during the application process? And how did you land a successful career after PhD graduation?
I had to go through a vetting process to get into my program. I think at the time, there was I think I was told there was like 350 plus applicants, and they only want to do a cohort of 16.
Hmm.
So you go through this, you write your letter, obviously take some time writing your letter. They'll ask about it. They want your background, your resume, and everything else. And then you meet with the program chair, and I think it was like a 2.5 hour interview, if I remember correctly. And, they just, I just say this is like, be transparent. Um, that's why if you've never looked at anything from Simon Sinek, I'm a Simon Sinek, follower.
Mm,
Read about his why. Like, you want to know your why, like why you want to do it, and also, like, do your research on why that program connects to what might be your success. And so I was able to walk through that. But I will tell you what really helped me is that I did my research on people that actually were in the program. So I went on LinkedIn. I looked at people that actually had graduated from it, reached out to them. I got a couple of people that reached back to me. I just asked them, like, "Hey, what did it take to be successful in it? It looks like you got your doctorate, and I'm just curious, like, what it took to do that." And a lot of them shared with me, like, things that worked and didn't work. The big thing for me was, I had to convince that person that was interviewing me that I was going to be able to put together enough amount of time in my day or my week to take care of that. It's like 168 hours in a week, and I had to demonstrate that I really looked at how I set aside 25 to 30 hours. I have to tell you, um, when I heard that that was what it was going to take, because that was the initial conversation that we had, I was thinking, there's no way it's going to take that long. I mean, I didn't take that long doing my graduate program, my master's program, but I got to tell you, it did take me that much time. And I'm really glad that I went through my day and my week and figured out how I would carve that out. So yeah, I was able to walk them through that. I was genuine. I was my authentic self. I was confident. I did my homework, and I was selected. And I will tell you this, and a lot of universities may not want to share this with you. It's not uncommon for the graduation rate for people to go out in a dissertation, or excuse me, a doctoral program. The numbers are a lot lower not everybody not everybody goes to that point where they defend their dissertation. So, universities are trying to make sure that they want to drive those numbers up. So they want to make sure that you're committed to do that. And so, the second part of your question is, how did I land a successful career path? Um, it's a great question. I was actually in my career path when I got my doctorate, so that was pretty. It was a no brainer. But I will tell you how I've leveraged it, and I've transitioned since then. I currently work for Amazon. I'm in their mechatronics division, which is robotics. I'm responsible for learning, and my doctorate has really helped me establish myself as a SME in that particular area. I am not, even though I have worked in technology, I'm not what I would call a technologist. So having a combination of experience with adult learners, and also the fact that I have a background in a variety of other things combined with that educational experience, it's all the way that I've branded myself. And I have a branding personal brand webinar out there that is probably something you might want to take a look at. So I've been really good about encapsulating everything that I've done and utilizing that in a way that makes employers look at me and go, hey, they can add value to what we're trying to do here. So it's a process. It's not impossible. You just have to work at it. So if you're spending a lot of time on social media, doing a lot of other things to promote your brand, and different ways to look at your personal brand. Can you quickly state what you are to somebody in an elevator speech? Do your friends, do the people that are close to you, do your colleagues, will they shout out your name in a room when an opportunity comes out unaided, right? And that's how you have a brand. So, and that all ties
Mm,
to this. So that's
for,
how I
sh-
would answer that question.
for sure. Thank you. And actually, so real quick, we have one last question and we'll cut it off
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Um, so our question is, to be able to teach at a college, do you need a PhD in postdoc?
Wow. No. It depends. It really depends on the level in the university or the vocational provider. I know people that have had just a bachelor's degree and have taught at community colleges. I've known people that have taught, master's courses, and they've had master's degrees. I mean, depend. So I'm not going to get into the accreditation thing, but depending on how you're programmatically accredited, for example, if you're programmatically accredited for business classes, um, there's a requirement that I think that 70% of your classes have to be taught by PhD level or doctoral level. That's just the way it is. But it's really a university's choice um, on what they do, and also how it aligns with their accreditation. So like I said, I've seen people teach with bachelor's degrees. I've seen people teach with doctorates. It really just depends on that institution that you're working with. Also, it also depends on your skill set, your experience. Um, you know, that those types of things factor into it. So
Definitely. Thank you. Well, Bob, we really appreciate having you today with us and providing your insight into getting the best educational return on investment for those thinking about going back to school. Really appreciate all the insight.
thank you. Thanks for everybody that joined today. So
And thank you to our audience for your great questions. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending a short survey to all, as well as the links to Dr. Danielle's resources to all registrants after this event. Would love your feedback. Please like and subscribe to our channels. Check back daily on our social media for future live stream updates. Have a great day, everyone.
thank you.